So Russia just launched their largest mechanized assault in a long time, and it was met almost immediately with a wall of Ukrainian drones, resulting in at least 100 Russian soldiers killed, 20 armored vehicles, and 40 motorcycles destroyed. Now, we've got quite a bit of footage from this specific engagement, and we're going to dive into that, as well as the accounts from 3 Ukrainian units that took part in this fight, as well as one Russian mill blogger documenting just how fierce this fighting is north of Pokrovsk. Now, starting out, I want to zoom in on the map here to show you where this specific battle took place. This is Deep State map, and the focus today is going to be north of Pokrovsk. This is an area in eastern Ukraine that has seen the bulk of the fighting, bulk of the heavy fighting for about a year now. It's no doubt been the focus of Russian offensive operations. The key areas are going to be in this northern pocket here. So when looking at this map, it gets messy to the north. The tan area is area held by Ukraine, the red held by Russia. The gray area is disputed territory. Blue and green is territory once held by Russia, since liberated by Ukraine. What we're looking at today is this section right here. Russian forces trying to capture Shakov, and a lot of the heaviest fighting happening down here just to the south of this crossroads in Volodymyrivka. Now I'm going to pull up, for starters, the Azov footage to run through that to give us an idea of how this fight actually took place. Starting out here, we see, as Azov mentions in their write-up, a lot of motorcycles involved in the engagement, coming from a couple different directions. Azov says, this is the first Azov Corps, said that it was a combination of about 35 different units of heavy armored vehicles, so armored personnel carriers, tanks. We even saw some turtle tanks, but then a bunch of motorcycles as well, coming from a couple different locations. You can see, of course, these motorcycles getting taken out by Ukrainian drones one after the other. They do get into what they say is the heaviest fighting near the settlement of Volodymyrivka, where they say, and you see some of the armored vehicles advancing along the route here. Apparently, they were trying to take advantage of the poor weather. You can see some overcast skies there, and often drones have a hard time flying or just straight can't fly if there's any rain. Looks like maybe that's what they're trying to get at. But we see here some of the Russian forces landing, and according to Azov, this is in the settlement of Volodymyrivka, where they say some of the heaviest fighting took place here. So we're seeing clearly some of these armored vehicles being destroyed. They did mention that Russia was able to put on ground about 32 Russian infantrymen, and we see them moving away from the vehicles here. All of them brought forward either these turtle tanks. We actually see a couple of those in some later footage, modified armored personnel carriers. We've got some tanks. We've got some, of course, motorcycles, and then just traditional APCs. So we did see the infantry dismounting here, and according to Azov, these guys in this specific location went off to try to hide in some of these basements to wait out the night in some of the houses and basements, and they were pretty quickly hunted down through the course of the evening by drone units. So here you see some of the turtle tank-looking armored personnel carriers designed to move forward with some degree of firepower. A lot of these are tanks to be able to drop off the infantry who can then carry out the assault. You can see them firing in a couple different directions, but yeah, just getting smashed by Ukrainian drones left and right. And here are some of the Russian infantry actually making it forward, dismounting and trying to just plain find cover wherever they can in that northern settlement. Now, moving to a couple different assessments of what played out here, we've got Deep State map. Well, the Azov roll-up, for what it's worth, they said destroyed was 1 Russian armored tractor, 3 tanks, 16 enemy armored personnel carriers. They also lost 41 motorcycles, 107 Russian soldiers killed, 51 wounded. And they said as of the morning of October 10th, no enemy infantry movement was observed in that village, saying the enemy assault failed. A couple other assessments here coming from Deep State map. They say the area of responsibility of the 93rd Brigade took part in this operation, as well as the Russians took advantage of bad weather conditions, hoping they would avoid airstrikes, drone attacks. But this assault was doomed from the start. They say the destruction was carried out jointly with the 93rd Brigade by units including the 156th Mechanized, Azov, Omega Wings, 109th, Lazar's Group, and Phoenix. They said fighters of the 93rd Brigade shared footage of destroyed enemy equipment as they encountered on their way to the front line, also taking advantage of bad weather conditions, simultaneously with assault actions in the Volodymyrivka area. The Russians deployed 8 units of equipment, which immediately started getting hit. As a result of repelling the attack, 1 armored vehicle was destroyed, 2 damaged, and the others immediately retreated without making any further attempts. We also got this footage from the Ukrainian air assault forces talking about how they were fighting here. as well. They said Russian troops tried to break through the defense forces' fortification by throwing equipment and infantry into the attack wave after wave. Mobile groups on motorcycles operated in the first echelon, followed by tanks and armored vehicles with assault troops. They say Ukrainian units had prepared defensive lines in advance, installed mine explosive barriers, and clearly coordinated the actions of artillery and drone operators. Thanks to this, the enemy was disoriented and chaotically deployed infantry on unprepared lines. Now, something that's important to take away from all of that is this is the first large-scale mechanized assault we've seen in a long time, and you can see why. As soon as those tanks and APCs entered a clear field of view, they started getting hit left, right, and center. I mean, there are a lot of destroyed Russian armored vehicles in a very short period of time. That's what Russia has been trying to avoid by sending forward small elements, either in unarmored vehicles like pickup trucks or ATVs, maybe even motorcycles at times, or of course, we've seen a lot of footage of Russian soldiers just straight walking from one location to another, also being hunted down by Ukrainian drones. Now, what's notable here is a lot of those mechanized vehicles, armored vehicles, did escape, it appears. So just going off of the Azov assessment, for one, which to me seems like the biggest picture view of this fight, they talk about 35 armored vehicles being utilized in this assault. Their roll-up includes, 20 total armored personnel carriers destroyed. You know, it's a little more than half. Those are significant losses for Russia, no doubt, but that means that at least 15, according to this math, at least 15 were able to participate in this fight, where everybody died from what it looks like, but they were saved to fight another day. So that's, the effectiveness of these armored assaults. They're getting hit, getting destroyed pretty quickly, but they at least can sustain some damage and stay in the fight, whereas, of course, these motorcycles and pickup trucks are just getting destroyed and they're done, right? There's no more use for those. Now, I do want to look at some Russian assessments of this fight as well. Archangel of Special Forces talked about this specific engagement, actually mentioning that Ukraine was using F-16s as close air support to hit the Russian positions. He said, quote, "The most intense section of the front right now can rightfully be considered the Pokrovsk-Dobropilya direction, where the fighting does not cease for a minute. Sabotage groups are engaged on both sides, and Ukraine has begun using their F-16s to strike our troops. In the Dobropilya direction, intense fighting is taking place near Vladimirovka. Our troops today carried out an assault on the village with armored vehicles and preliminarily secured the outskirts. However, the situation is difficult as the Ukrainian armed forces, with the forces of the 225th Separate Assault Battalion, are actively striking our units." Again, a bit of a mixed report there. Ukraine is saying that those that landed and made it out of the vehicles were pretty quickly destroyed and then hunted down during the course of the night, and there was no movement noted in the village the next morning. The Russian mill blogger Archangel of Special Forces says, quote, "In addition, for a sudden attack on Russian units, ambushes have been organized by sabotage and reconnaissance groups of the 1st Battalion of the 225th Separate Assault Battalion. Such activity again indicates the fragility of the line of contact, as our reconnaissance and sabotage groups are also actively operating behind enemy lines." And then he notes that using one F-16, Ukraine dropped a guided bomb in this area. So I do want to note, when it comes to the F-16s, I've not seen any other evidence of that. Haven't seen the Ukrainians talk about it. We haven't seen any footage of F-16s carrying out airstrikes here around this specific engagement. We are seeing more and more use of aerial bombs being dropped by likely F-16s on Russian targets, but don't know if it was exactly tied in with this specific engagement. Another keynote here from the Russian perspective, talking about the fragility of the lines. I want to go back to the map here, because I think this is important. You see how scattered this became all of a sudden just north of Pokrovsk. There's not really anywhere else along the front that looks like this, at least not right now. I mean, there's other areas where there's been a little push and pull, and you can see how some of these sectors might be in danger of starting to look like that. But what all of this is representative of, I mean, even some of these areas, when you get up here near Kupiansk, it's not even quite like that, right? This is another bulge that the Russian forces pushed to the northern outskirts of the city. There hasn't been, really, Ukraine is holding, but they're not really pushing back. There's not been a large-scale counterattack. What we saw down here north of Pokrovsk was Russians were able to infiltrate Ukrainian lines because there were gaps in the lines. But once they got through, they were not able to establish a significant defensive position to be able to hold large chunks of territory. So you're seeing pockets of Russian forces with Ukrainian elements able to encircle at times. And that's what he's talking about here near Shakov as well. while they tried to penetrate through some gaps in the Ukrainian lines, anybody who even did get close to that, all of a sudden, as we saw with those soldiers landing in Volodymyrivka, some of them got out. They weren't able to hold that position for very long. So that's a theme right now that we're really seeing on both sides. And that's the reason that elements like the ones that took part in this fight, Azov, 93rd Brigade, and others, they were sent down to the Pokrovsk direction to try to clean up and to hunt down and stop some of these sabotage groups that are infiltrating between the lines with not necessarily a goal of setting up a long-term defensive position or even calling Russian units forward, but just causing chaos a little bit behind the front. It can be pretty effective, and it is effective right now on both sides of the line. Now, some reporting here that I think went a little bit under the radar, but I feel it's optimistic, it's positive. I want to share this with you all. It was a poll that came out from Harvard Capps Harris just a couple days ago, and it actually shows that the majority of Americans support providing weapons to Ukraine. And when you dig in even a little deeper than that, you find out that there is more Republican support than Democrat support, which I didn't expect. It's one poll, all right? So we got to keep that in mind. But I'll put the link in the description below for anybody who wants to check this out in their entirety. This was a Harvard Capps Harris poll run from 1 to 2 October 2025 of 2,413 registered U.S. voters. And a couple ones that stood out to me here, they said, do you support or oppose additional economic sanctions on Russia to try to force it to end the war? 77% in favor, 23% opposed. And when you break that down by political party, Republicans show the strongest support, 86% in favor. Love seeing it, all right? This is positive news on both sides, but we need to keep in mind, especially with the sanctions, that is on President Trump right now. He can do that today. There's a lot of American support for backing Ukraine. You got to get past the internet bubble. Don't go on X. It's a mess over there right now, or Twitter. But you get down to internet comment sections, and it might sound like it's less than 50%, or maybe in the optimistic periods, it's 50-50. It's not. Consistently, from the day this war began, there has been overwhelming American support for Ukraine. The times that gets touchy is when it talks about giving them money. But like when it comes to, assisting them with weapons deliveries, or in this case, layering sanctions on Russia, 86% of Republicans favor that, 77% of Americans. You know how hard it is to get 77% of Americans to agree on anything? All right? They're in favor of more sanctions on Russia. Let's see that through. But even more specifically here, talking about weapons, they said, should the Trump administration continue to provide weaponry to Ukraine and impose further economic sanctions on Russia if it refuses to negotiate and prolongs the bloodshed, or should it not do so for fear of antagonizing Russia? There's a lot to that question. I got it. And no poll has perfect questions and perfect answers. But the gist of this is, if Russia is not negotiating, should we continue to arm Ukraine? 68% said yes, continue to provide weaponry and impose sanctions. 32% said do not continue out of fear of antagonizing Russia. And again, the strongest in favor argument here came from the GOP, or the Republican Party, the right side of politics here in the United States, was 73% in favor of continuing to arm Ukraine. We have seen this at times. There have been right-leaning politicians on the right side of the aisle that push this forward every so often. They kind of get pushed back and decide to focus on something else. But we just need to make sure this message continues to be heard. This is the will of the American people, is to support Ukraine in their fight with Russia. Now, there's a limit to that, no doubt. If you ask a question of how many people support U.S. troops on the ground in Ukraine, I've never seen that even come close to over 20%. That is not a strong opinion. When you get into should NATO, intercept Russian munitions, that percentage is even relatively low. But when it comes to should we assist Ukraine as they continue to fight for their own independence, their own sovereignty against Russia, overwhelmingly the American people support that. And I don't know, maybe at some point we'll be able to move that through Congress. On that note, for anybody that's interested, if you're in the DC area or thinking of heading out that way, I'll be out there in a couple weeks with the Ukraine Action Summit for just this purpose, to talk to some of our lawmakers about what we can do and how we can advocate for some of these policies that the American people support, and we're not seeing necessarily pushed through Congress or even to the president at this point. So I'll be out there with the organization Volunteers for Ukraine. We'll have a booth set up there and trying to talk to lawmakers over the course of a couple days. If you're interested in attending, there's a link I'll put in the description below. You can sign up. A lot of good panels, a lot of good information, and there's a code. I got a discount code, so you can get a little money off the registration fee. That's unpaid. There's no sponsorship or anything there. Just I know a lot of you might be interested in that, so I asked the group if there's anything I can do to offer to get more people to attend. If you do make it out there, if you see me, stop by, say hi. Would love to meet face to face. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.